We've reached the point in this series of lectures where we're going to stop just looking at the internal governance of a firm. We're going to start looking at how the firm relates to the other areas around it, and how actually issues of monitoring and issues of governance can be dealt with via external relationships of the firm. We're going to look at three theories in principle. The first theory we're going to look at is resource dependency theory. In this, the key element of resource dependency theory is that those things that the firm cannot do and those resources it needs linking to, it can do so through appointing the right directors. It's an attempt to overcome the uncertainty that exists in a lot of relationships with outside suppliers. And this could be suppliers of materials. So, for instance, you might well find that there might be a supplier of steel on the board of a car plant factory. It could be suppliers of skills. So we often get educationalists on the boards of companies when they're very reliant on local universities perhaps or local colleges for producing their skills. Or it could be finance. Bankers regularly sit on the boards of large companies, and in certain countries abroad it's very, very common for a banker to sit on the boards of certain companies. So it's a very major issue. Its main role, of course, is about getting rid of the uncertainty in that relationship. The second approach we're going to consider is that of institutional theory. This is a very modern approach which has its need for a combination of institutional understandings and strategic choice and chance. And is related again at trying to get those institutions that support and fund and finance an organisation to be represented on the boards and to be working the way that an organisation itself relates to those groups, the people that may become part of it, so they become institutionalized in its relationships. The final model we'll be looking at is network theory. And network theory is like the social media of governance. So it goes back a long time before social media. It's based on the idea that governance in many industries might actually rely on informal social systems rather than major bureaucratic structures. Network governance is very important in industries that have a lot of demand uncertainty, that have short product line cycles and rapid dissemination. So you get network government in things like film. You get network governance in things like music and in things like fashion, where you may want to link with people for a temporary period of time in order to get the latest film out, the latest music. You often see at the beginning of films, for instance, that they've been produced by a number of people. For instance, it may be a major studio, but it may also be a special effects provider, someone like DreamWorks. You often see these companies linking together in order to make the films. Networks governance is a major area. First theory we're looking at is going to briefly at the person who extolled it originally, Amy Hillman. Resource dependency theory was something that came about, or at least written about a lot by Professor Hillman. She was a nationally renowned professor of management, an extremely popular teacher at Arizona State University, and was named the new executive dean of the W.P. Carey School of Business. Hillman is editor of the world's top management journal in terms of citation impact, the Academy of Management Review, and she serves on the editorial boards of two other top management journals. She has won numerous national awards as an outstanding reviewer and researcher. Students and colleagues consider her to be an exceptional teacher, having honored her with 2 outstanding professor awards, 2 outstanding teacher awards, and a Dean's Council 100 Distinguished Scholar designation. She was also voted one of the most popular professors in Business Week's rankings of MBA faculty in 1998. I feel like one of my biggest accomplishments has been helping to shape the critical thinking of so many students over the years, says Hillman. My new position, I want to focus on working with faculty and students to help the W.P. Carey School of Business become an even more top-of-mind business school, regarding both teaching and research prominence. With her background as a general manager of small retail and manufacturing business, Hillman also recently played a key role in advancing the Spirit of Enterprise Centre at the W.P. Carey School of Business, which helps hundreds of businesses each year. The centre offers companies access to student teams, consulting projects by the firms with valuable work with students with hands-on business experience. You'll see from this that Amy was very much a hands-on person when it came to dealing with business, and she believed in network governance, and she got her university departments in supporting and involving itself in the surrounding universities, and that came partly about from her background in business. Small retail and manufacturing means it cannot provide all the service themselves and need to have strong and good relationships with other people from outside. So what is dependency theory itself? Well, it impacts on a number of things. It's the optimal divisional structure of the organizations. You should know that the reality is it looks at trying to get organizations to link together in a sort of external version of Chandler's M form, where different, completely separate organizations react and work together. It involves itself trying recruiting board members and employees who can bring in skills, bring access to facilities, access to resources that are not available elsewhere in the firm. It is based around the idea of production strategies. Do you buy or make or sell is the idea of that. Should you get somebody else to do it or should you manufacture it yourself? These are the big questions. And it actually came about to a certain extent as a theory of the consequence of the importance of procurement, which was first formalized in the late 1970s with the publication of The External Control of Organizations, A Resource Dependence Perspective by Pfeffer and Salonak in 1978. It is very, very powerful and very controlling of the kind of organizational strategy based on the idea that procurement actually became a strategic thing rather than just the fact you bought the cheapest. You actually tried to get people who would be involved in the purchasing, who would actually be involved in design, so suppliers would be involved in the design of the product to make sure you use the best possible materials, the best possible spare parts, the best possible factors to go into it. Another thing gets affected the contract structure. Instead of actually coming to the point, as we noted before, that where you reach contract dispute, relationships are basically over, you may never do business again. It's designed to build in links between external organizations that are as strong as internal links, and let's get rid of the need for expensive litigation, get rid of the need for expensive contracts. And therefore, it is very much about the strengthening of the external organizational links. So, what are the core arguments? The basic argument is simple. The organizations respond to organizations they are dependent on. So if you have a dependency on an organization, if you need something, you will react to what it does. You will need to react to what it does if you're to be a successful organization. It also relies on the fact that organizations will try to minimize the risk that comes with this. And this is classically would have been with stern, expensive transaction, cost-heavy contracts and legal requirements. But actually, with the procurement becoming a strategic desire and the realization that going to litigation was not a great idea, then there became a number of factors. The level of which you're willing to get involved in resource dependency theory, in which you're willing to get involved in network governance, you're willing to get people from outside into your board, will depend on what cost to the organization is there if you give in to the external demands. I.e., if you would allow companies to say to you what they want, if you allow them to dictate to you, your suppliers, is there an expensive cost? How important is it that you actually work in a situation in which you are all working in power, in which you're all attempting to achieve the same thing? What costs are involved in actually abandoning resources? I mean, it may well be that certain suppliers can be replaced. It may be that you can get your training internal rather than having to use the local universities, local colleges. But is this going to be expensive? Do you going to have to set up an infrastructure? How quickly can you do it? And are these demands conflicting with other demands of the organization, with other actors within your organization? And the level of the dependency, the higher the costs, the greater the conflicts, the more likely you're going to say or argue that actually what you should be doing is getting together very closely, not merging as organizations, but merging of interests. And I say this is normal. This is very normal in many European systems and in Far Eastern systems that actually have cross membership of boards. So what's the argument replied to governance? Well, actually, if you think about the arguments about good boards that we discussed with Mace, what governance does, it allows your board of directors to be people who have independence from the managers, have independence from the chief executive officer. They have, if you like, their own base, their own strength, their own active people of interest, people who rely on to the profits. One of the problems we noticed with Mace, of course, was that many of the owners of the shares were inactive and took very little interest. But actually, if you're the supplier, if you're the financier, if you're perhaps the provider of the educational students, then you actually have an interest. You have an interest in actually how well it is. So you're interested by the company. You want to make sure you get paid. You want to make sure your business keeps running. But you're an outsider. So you're interested outside the firm. But unlike many people with shares whose outside interest might be at best perfunctory, your entire organization relies on it. So you're very outside. You're dispassionate on the internal basis. You don't want to get involved in internal arguments. You don't want to get involved in internal debates. You're actually neutral in many of the arguments internally the firm. The idea is that you will always act in the best interest of all the links in the network, because what your interest is that the network continues. You do not favor any one link. If any one link gets too strong, that may well destroy the network. So you are not favoring any people in particular within this organization. So what does it hope to achieve if you adopt this form of? Well, the key interest is in adaptation and change. It has the underlying assumption drawn from strategic management literature that in order to survive, organizations must cope successfully with change and uncertainty. And that directors play a key role in these coping efforts through two mechanisms. And that is what they're actually trying to do, is they're trying to do that. So the directors are trying to anticipate and manage uncertainty. And because there's any link with the external environment, the more you get away from your own organization, the less control you have, the more likely it is to go wrong. Now, if you're trying to manage this by making them directors, but also the directors provides resources. These resources might be information because they know things that you don't. They have access to ideas you don't. They may tell you things that you don't know. They give you access to knowledge, give you access to skills. They give you access to things that would enable you to actually acquire resources. They may well, for instance, have access to finance. They may have access to raw materials. All of these are very important in the terms of organizations functioning properly. In a real way, what they're talking about is overcoming the transaction costs. Because the transaction cost within firms is always considered to be lower than the transaction forms between firms and outside organizations. This has tended to favor the growth of large multinationals, the centralization of power, the horizontal and vertical integration of your supply chain so that you will actually then have less costs. However, if you can actually start to rely on directors acting as if the network and the things is complete the same, and this is often argued that we actually these days firms don't compete, supply chains compete. So this supply network that exists from raw material to final customer has to be bound together in some way that is cheaper. And there's traditionally the growth of the big companies that led to diseconomies of scale that sometimes really got so large it overcame the economies of scale. Well, actually, you can get rid of some of those by having a resource dependency based supply network with cross directorships, cross ownership of shares, sort of working very closely together. So the predictions then, of course, that were made, and these, as we said, the problem with some of the corporate governance literature is it's not scientific insofar as it cannot be used to make predictions. But resource dependency theory is unusual. We can make these predictions from resource dependency theory. One of the predictions is there's a relationship between uncertainty, size, and composition of board. So the more uncertain the environment, the larger and more diverse the board will be. The idea being that if you are, for instance, an international supply chain that runs through 3 or 4 countries, you will have to have people who have knowledge of all 3 or 4 of those countries on the board. You will also need to have people about the various knowledge of the various products, the various raw materials that come from those countries. So this is what is the main thing. But it also actually says for the first time we can start to see that actually there is a financial and strategic and competitive advantage if you adapt to your environment. If you have a diverse board, if you have information from elsewhere, you will be able to perform greater than those firms that have not made this adaptation. And so we basically say there are probably 4 director types that can be brought through in resource dependency theory. There are some insiders, because you still need knowledge of your own firm and how it relates. You'll have people who are experts on the business you are in. So, for instance, you may want to have people who are, if you are supplying computer systems to the banks, you may want to have financial experts who understand how the banks are operating. There'll be support specialists. If you're actually having to maintain very expensive pieces of equipment, maybe paper machines, maybe oil rigs, things like that, you'll have to have people who understand that. But also you'll have to support specialists in if you're dealing with international types, like people who might understand different cultures, people who understand different ways of doing personnel, business, human resources. But it's also possible that you may bring in community influentials. And this is where you see people like Tony Blair ending up on a board. It's where you see people like professors from universities, from business schools, from specialist departments ending up on the board, and where you make other like grandees from the community. Some people say it's the gravy train, it's the sinecure for people who've done the business within firms, but in other cases say no, actually it's a reward, it's an understanding. Firms actually get something from having people and politicians who know how the system works on board.